In a previous movie, we set this chunk of navigation up, and the key here was using a list. So each one of these pieces of navigation, each one of these links is actually a list item within a list. And the whole thing is dropped within a div tag. And this is what we ended up with. So we created the HTML code and we wrote some really specific rules to make this happen, including a hover state. And this is all fine and you can go back and watch that, but sometimes you want horizontal navigation. You want the links to sit next to each other. So I want to just run through the steps to do that. A lot of the same steps that were used to develop this particular chunk of navigation will be used again. I'm going to put this navigation into its own div tag. So using the power of Dreamweaver, drawing an AP div tag, naming it. This one I will name nav2. Clicking inside of that to make sure that I'm actively in that div tag. Ask for the list, an unordered list. I'll make a different kind of list this time. Some really important stuff. Cake, candy, okay, the 4 food groups. So it's already developing to look like a vertical list, but the point again is we're going to use this list origination along with CSS to make it into a horizontal reading list. So I need to add a few more details here, including some sort of placeholder links highlighting each list item one by one, moving to the link field, entering a £. If you're coding by hand, if you're using Phrase or Notepad, just make sure that you have a list starting with a UL. Each list item is coded with LI. Every linkable item, of course, would be surrounded by the href. If you really want these to go someplace, that's fine, but I've used the placeholder of £. We're at the point now where our list is finished. It actually is navigation. It just doesn't look very good. So we need the cool CSS stuff to make this happen. I have a PDF file that I'm referencing called listnav.pdf. There are 2 pages. One page deals with horizontal reading, if you want your navigation chunks to sit side by side. And the other page, the second page, refers to the styles that would render a vertical list. And I've already covered that in a previous movie. So I'm moving back up to the top. Think of this like a recipe. We need every one of these rules that are listed here, and we need every one of these properties. Otherwise, your recipe will not work. The first rule that we're looking at here is specific information about the div container itself. As I used Dreamweaver's draw AP div tag, as soon as I drew that on my page and named it, I named mine nav2, Dreamweaver, there we go. Dreamweaver created the properties for me. So it is absolutely positioned. It is a height and a width and a distance from the left and the top. These are all specific properties to this div container. If you are being very literal and you're typing all of these in, you'll have a different end result. But these will be arbitrary and vary for each container that you create. The next rule that I need to create is to control the list itself. What we're doing specifically is eliminating any margin or any padding that came in by default, and we're also going to tell the list to float to the left. So only these properties are needed in this rule. Now remember, my div tag I did not name nav, it is named nav2. So try not to be very literal. You'll have to read between the lines a bit if you're using this PDF. Use your own div names for your own coding. So new rule, and For the most part, you're going to be working in this compound selector type. And let me just create this whole thing from the beginning. If I have a div with an ID of nav2 and it is a list, it is a UL, that's the first rule that I'm going to need. So I create that, margin 0 and padding 0 and float to the left. So those are the three properties that you need. And fortunately, they're all in this box category. So if you're using Dreamweaver's CSS writing, that will be done pretty quickly. And if you're coding by hand, again, just those three rules: margin, padding 0, float to the left. So we're making some progress. We've eliminated the space. We still have our bullet points, and we still have some work to do to get everything to sit side by side. So that will take us to our next particular rule. If we have a div container that has a list with a list item, and clearly we have that, we're going to display these as inline, and that will allow each of the items to sit next to each other side by side. I've said this before, but just think of this as a recipe. You know, you have to have eggs, you have to have oil. Well, you have to have these properties, and you have to have these properties. If you reference this and just type in rule by rule, property by property, this will turn out as expected. So I do need a new rule. Move into the compound. Again, it is an ID of nav2. And if I have a list that has a list item, then I will display, I'm in the block category, display inline. Okay, well, you know, sometimes you make these changes and what happened? Nothing. Did anything happen? Maybe not yet. Maybe not until we hit live view are you going to see some results. So just be patient. This will kind of come together. It may not be, however, until you get more rules in place. The next rule that I'm writing is where the real meat of your style decisions will live, the colors, the fonts, the borders, and that will be the final rule. There is one property that you must have, which is float left, and then everything else that you add, those are your own decisions. So I'll create the rule, we'll add our necessary float left, and then we can experiment with what we might want specifically for our navigation. So one more rule, going into the compound, nav2, if there's a list with a list item and a link, so we're going from very general to very specific, it needs to float to the left. Okay, so I hit apply. I'm trying to make some room so you can see what I'm doing here. There, that might work. I hit apply, and at least visually in the design view, you can see these sitting side by side. Oh, right, well, not very attractive. So now we need to go in and add some more visual styling to make this look better. I'm going to put in a background color. Okay. And everything's still sort of running together. So box category, spread these out a bit. So on the right of each one of these, I'll throw in some margin just to separate those. Okay, so now I have 20 pixels of margin between each, and clearly very, very cramped within their little box. So let's see, I'll add some padding into the inside of the box. My links are varying widths. Cookie is obviously a longer word than pie, and so on. So I have different widths of my actual buttons or links. Sometimes that's a preference. Sometimes you'd like things to be even and equal. If you leave the width as is with nothing, you'll get the size rendered by the size of the link. I can, however, if I do want that equality, I could enter an actual width, and that will apply to all of them. So now they're the same width. I could go in, you know, tons of things you could do. I don't want to dwell on on all of the possibilities, but I could center that within each button, if you will, if you're thinking about it that way. It can change fonts, change colors of the text, take off the underline. So what you do at this point is endless, and these are your decisions. But just to sum it up, the whole point of doing it this way is that we've started as a list. The navigation is within a div tag, within a UL tag, within list items. This is the best practice. So practice, practice, practice. Refer to the PDF. The more you do this, the more it will become second nature. But this really is the correct way to develop navigation.